"I cannot leave you alone. You must come with me," the cowboy said when he saw her hiding in the barn. The sun was already sinking behind the wide fields when Ethan guided his horse back toward the ranch. The day had been long and tiring. His hands ached from fixing fences, and dust clung to his boots and jeans. The land around him stretched quietly, painted in soft orange light. Nights came early out here, and Ethan always made sure everything was secure before darkness fully settled in. The ranch had belonged to his family for generations. It was not fancy, but it was honest land. The old wooden barn stood a little away from the house, its doors worn from years of wind and work. Ethan usually checked it last. He had learned from experience that animals could get loose or small problems could turn big if ignored. As he walked toward the barn, the evening felt unusually still. Even the crickets seemed quiet. Ethan slowed his steps without knowing why. He told himself he was just tired, but something felt different. He reached for the lantern hanging near the door and lit it, the warm glow cutting through the shadows inside. The barn smelled of hay, wood, and earth. Ethan took a few steps in, his boots echoing softly. He scanned the stalls, counting the animals by habit. Everything looked normal at first. Then he heard it, a soft movement, almost like someone trying not to breathe too loudly. Ethan froze. He held the lantern higher, listening carefully. The sound came again, faint but clear. It was not an animal. Years on the ranch had taught him to know the difference. His heart began to beat faster, not with fear but alertness. "Hello," he called out, keeping his voice calm. There was no answer. Ethan took a slow step forward. He didn't want to scare whoever was there. He moved the lantern toward the far corner where hay bales were stacked high. That's when he saw her. She was crouched behind the hay, her body pulled inward like she was trying to disappear. Her clothes were dusty and worn. Strands of hair had slipped loose from a messy braid, framing a face that looked pale and tired. Her eyes were wide with fear, reflecting the lantern light. She flinched when the light touched her. Ethan stopped immediately. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently. She didn't speak. Her hands were shaking and she pressed herself tighter against the hay. Ethan's thoughts raced. 100 questions came to his mind, but he pushed them aside. He could see she was exhausted. Anyone hiding in a barn at night was not there by choice. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head slightly but said nothing. Ethan noticed how thin she looked, how her shoulders sagged as if carrying a heavy weight. He had seen hardship before, not just in others but in his own life. Something about her reminded him of himself years ago when he had felt alone in the world. "You don't need to be afraid," he said. "This is my land." At those words she stiffened, panic flashing across her face like she expected him to throw her out. "I won't call anyone," Ethan added quickly. I need to know why you're here." Silence stretched between them. The barn creaked softly as the wind moved outside. Finally she spoke, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "I didn't mean to steal anything," she said. "I was just resting. I'll leave." She started to stand, but her legs gave out slightly and she caught herself on the hay. Ethan stepped closer without thinking, steadying her arm. "You're not going anywhere like this," he said firmly. She pulled back, startled by his touch, but he let go immediately, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't mean to scare you." She looked at him carefully, as if trying to decide whether he was telling the truth. Years of fear seemed written in her eyes. Ethan sighed quietly. He knew what the right thing was, even if it complicated his life. "I cannot leave you alone," he said slowly. "You must come with me." Her eyes widened. "With you," she repeated. "Yes," he said. "At least until you're safe." She shook her head. "I don't want trouble. I just needed a place to hide." Ethan understood more than she knew. He had lost his parents young and learned early what it meant to rely on yourself. But he had also learned that surviving alone forever left scars. "You're not trouble," he said, "and you won't be hiding here tonight." She hesitated, fear battling with exhaustion. The truth was clear. She had nowhere else to go. "My name is Ethan," he added, hoping it might help her trust him. After a long pause, she whispered, "Clara." The sound of her name felt heavy, like it carried a long story behind it. Ethan nodded. "All right, Clara, let's get you somewhere warm." She glanced around the barn one last time, as if saying goodbye to the small, fragile safety it had offered. Then she followed him, her steps slow and careful. The walk to the house was quiet. The sky had turned deep blue and stars were beginning to appear. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, shivering slightly. Ethan noticed and took off his jacket, offering it to her without a word. She hesitated, then accepted it, pulling it tightly around her shoulders. Inside the house, the warmth hit them immediately. The simple home was clean but lived in, with wooden furniture and the smell of coffee lingering in the air. Ethan turned on a lamp, soft light filling the room. "You can sit," he said, pointing to a chair. Clara sat slowly, her eyes scanning the room like she expected someone to jump out at any moment. Ethan poured her a glass of water and set it in front of her. "Drink," he said. She did, carefully, like she wasn't used to being offered kindness. He then handed her a plate with some bread and soup he had left from earlier. "Eat if you want." Her hands trembled as she took the spoon. After the first bite, she stopped herself, like she didn't trust the moment to be real. Ethan leaned against the counter, watching quietly. He didn't ask questions yet. He knew pushing too hard could close her off. Minutes passed. The tension in her shoulders slowly eased as warmth and food did their work. "I won't stay long," she said suddenly. "I just need one night." Ethan looked at her seriously. "You don't have to decide anything tonight." She studied his face, searching for lies. All she found was tired honesty. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Ethan thought for a moment. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it," he said simply. That was true, though he didn't explain further. The clock ticked softly on the wall. Outside, the wind brushed against the windows. Clara felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Safety felt unfamiliar, almost dangerous. Ethan showed her a small guest room. The bed was simple, the blankets clean. "You can sleep here," he said. "I'll be nearby if you need anything." She nodded, standing awkwardly at the doorway. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan paused, then added, "You're safe here. For tonight, that's enough." As he closed the door gently behind her, Ethan leaned against the hallway wall, letting out a slow breath. He didn't know who Clara was or what she was running from. He only knew that finding her in the barn was not an accident. It was the beginning of something that would change both of their lives. In the quiet of the house, two strangers lay awake under the same roof, each carrying their own fears, each standing at the edge of a new path neither had planned to walk. Morning light crept slowly into the small guest room, touching the plain curtains and the edge of the wooden bed. Clara opened her eyes but did not move. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the quiet settled in, different from the tense silence she was used to. There were no raised voices, no sudden footsteps, no fear pressing on her chest. Still, she stayed still, listening. From somewhere in the house, she heard soft sounds, cups touching a counter, a kettle being set down. Normal sounds, safe sounds. Her body slowly relaxed, though her mind stayed alert. She had learned the hard way that calm moments could break without warning. She sat up slowly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Ethan's jacket lay folded on the chair beside the bed. She touched it lightly, as if to make sure it was real. No one had offered her warmth in a long time. After a few minutes, she stood and opened the door quietly. The hallway smelled faintly of wood and soap. She followed the sound into the kitchen, stopping just inside the doorway. Ethan stood at the counter, his back to her, pouring coffee into a mug. He looked calmer than the night before, like this was a world he understood. When he noticed her reflection in the window, he turned. "Good morning," he said gently. She nodded. "Morning. You sleep all right?" She hesitated, then nodded again. "Better than I expected." "That's good," he said. "There's breakfast if you're hungry." On the table sat a simple meal, eggs, bread, and fruit. Nothing fancy, but it felt like more than she deserved. She sat slowly, keeping her hands in her lap. Ethan placed a cup of tea in front of her. "It's warm," he said. "Figured you might prefer that." "Thank you," she said quietly. They ate in silence for a while. It wasn't uncomfortable, just careful. Clara noticed how Ethan didn't stare or rush her. He let the moment breathe. Finally, he spoke. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," he said. "But I'd like to understand how you ended up in my barn." Her fingers tightened around the cup. She stared into the tea, watching the steam rise and disappear. "I've been moving around," she said slowly, "from place to place." "Why?" he asked softly. She swallowed. "Because staying still was dangerous." Ethan didn't interrupt. He waited. "I grew up in a small town," she continued. "It was supposed to be peaceful, but sometimes places like that hide the worst things." Her voice shook, but she pushed through. "There were people who were meant to protect me," she said. "They didn't." Ethan felt a familiar heaviness settle in his chest. He knew that kind of story. He stayed quiet, giving her space. "When I finally left," she said, "I had nothing. No money, no plan, just the need to get away." She looked up at him for the first time since she started talking. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," Ethan said firmly. "You were trying to survive." Something in his words broke through her walls. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. "I learned how to disappear," she said. "Barns, empty sheds, anywhere I wouldn't be noticed. I kept moving so no one could find me." Ethan leaned back in his chair, breathing slowly. "You don't have to live like that anymore," he said. She gave a small, sad smile. "You don't know that." "You're right," he admitted. "I don't know everything, but I know this: no one deserves to live in fear." She looked down again, her hands trembling. After breakfast, Ethan stood. "I've got work to do outside," he said. "You're welcome to rest, or if you want, you can help, no pressure." Helping felt safer than sitting alone with her thoughts. "I can help," she said. He nodded. "All right, I'll find you something simple." Outside, the air was cool and fresh. The open land stretched wide, free in a way that made Clara's chest ache. Ethan showed her how to feed the chickens and refill the water containers. His instructions were clear, patient. As she worked, something inside her settled. The tasks were small, but they made her feel useful, needed. Ethan watched her from a distance, careful not to hover. He noticed how she startled at sudden sounds, how she always checked her surroundings before moving. These were habits learned through pain. Later, while fixing a loose fence, he spoke again. "You said people were dangerous back where you came from," he said. "Are they looking for you?" Clara hesitated. "I don't think so, but I never felt safe enough to find out." "That makes sense," he said. They worked quietly for a while. The sun climbed higher, warming the ground beneath their feet. By midday, Clara's hands were sore, but it felt like honest pain. Ethan brought her water and sat on the fence beside her. "You're stronger than you think," he said. She laughed softly, surprised. "I don't feel strong." "Most strong people don't," he replied. As the day went on, Clara found herself laughing once or twice, small moments that felt strange on her lips. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she felt anything close to normal. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky change colors, Clara spoke again. "I keep expecting this to end," she said, "like I'll wake up and be running again." Ethan rested his arms on his knees. "Sometimes good things feel unreal when you're not used to them." She nodded slowly. "What if I bring danger to you?" He turned to face her. "That's a risk I choose," he said. "Not one you force on me." She studied his face, looking for doubt. She didn't find any. That night, as Clara lay in the guest room, she thought about the way the ranch felt, quiet but alive, strong but gentle. For the first time in a long while, sleep came without fear gripping her chest. Down the hall, Ethan lay awake too. He knew inviting her into his life meant change. But as he listened to the steady sounds of the house, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Neither of them said it out loud, but both understood that what began as a single night of shelter was slowly becoming something more. And though the past still loomed in shadows, A fragile trust was taking root, one careful day at a time. Days passed quietly, one blending into the next in a way Clara was not used to. Life on the ranch followed a steady rhythm: early mornings, long afternoons, calm evenings. At first, she counted the days in her head, expecting each one to be her last there. But as time moved forward without trouble, she slowly stopped counting. Every morning, Clara woke before the sun, not because she had to, but because her body was trained that way. Old habits told her that being alert meant staying safe. She would lie in bed for a few moments, listening to the sounds of the house. When she heard Ethan moving around in the kitchen or outside, she felt calmer. She began helping more around the ranch. At first, Ethan gave her small tasks: sweeping the porch, organizing tools, feeding animals. He never demanded anything. He only showed her what needed to be done and let her decide. That freedom mattered more to her than she could explain. Over time, she started doing things without being asked. She cleaned the kitchen after meals, washed clothes, and repaired small things she noticed were broken. Working gave her something solid to hold on to. Each task finished felt like proof that she belonged, at least for that moment. Ethan noticed the changes quietly. He saw how her movements became more confident, how she no longer jumped at every sound. But he also noticed what didn't change. She still watched the road carefully. She still flinched when strangers passed by the property. She still kept her past locked behind careful words. One afternoon, they worked together in the field, fixing an old fence that leaned dangerously to one side. The sun was warm and the sky was clear. Sweat ran down Ethan's face as he lifted a wooden post into place. "Can you hold that steady?" he asked. Clara nodded and placed her hands where he showed her. Their fingers brushed for a brief second. She pulled back slightly, then forced herself to stay still. Ethan noticed but didn't comment. He finished securing the post and stepped back. "Looks good," he said. She smiled, small but real. "We did it." He smiled too. "Yeah, we did." That simple sentence stayed with her longer than it should have. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch after dinner. Sometimes they talked. Other times they just watched the land grow quiet as the sun went down. Clara liked those moments best. There was no pressure to speak, no fear of saying the wrong thing. One night, as the stars filled the sky, Clara spoke without planning to. "I never stayed in one place this long before," she said. Ethan looked at her. "How long is this long?" "A few weeks," she answered. "That's the longest since I left." He nodded slowly. "Does it feel strange?" She thought about it. "It feels steady. That scares me a little." "That's understandable," he said. "Steady things can feel risky when you're used to running." She looked at him in surprise. "How do you know that?" Ethan took a deep breath. "After my parents passed, I moved around a lot. Family members, neighbors, anywhere that would take me. I never stayed long enough to get comfortable." She didn't know what to say, so she just listened. "This ranch," he continued, "was the first place that stayed the same no matter what. It gave me something solid when everything else felt uncertain." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "I've never had that." "You can," he said quietly, "if you want." She didn't answer. The idea felt too big to touch. As days turned into weeks, Clara began to feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before: attachment. She started to care about the animals, the house, the land. She even started caring about Ethan in a way that made her nervous. She worried what would happen if she stayed too long. What if she depended on this place? What if she lost it? One afternoon, a truck passed slowly along the road near the ranch. It didn't stop, but Clara froze when she heard the engine. Her breath caught and her heart raced. She ducked behind the side of the house before she even realized she was moving. Ethan found her moments later, crouched low, shaking. "It's okay," he said softly. "It's just someone passing by." She looked at him, shame and fear mixing in her eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "You don't need to apologize," he said firmly. "You're allowed to be afraid." She pressed her forehead against her knees. "I hate that I'm like this." He sat beside her on the ground, careful not to touch her without permission. "You're like this because you survived," he said. "There's nothing wrong with that." Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. She turned her face away, embarrassed. Ethan waited quietly until she spoke again. "I want to stay," she said softly, "but I don't know how to stop being afraid." "You don't have to stop all at once," he said. "You just take it one day at a time." That night, Clara dreamed of open fields instead of dark roads. When she woke, she felt lighter, though the fear was still there, resting quietly instead of shouting. Trust grew in small ways. Ethan trusted her with more responsibilities. He let her handle money for supplies, showed her how to care for injured animals, and asked for her opinions. Each time, she felt more rooted. She began to notice Ethan's habits too, the way he always double-checked locks at night, the way he grew quiet when memories pulled him away. She realized he carried his own scars, even if they were hidden behind strength. One evening, a storm rolled in suddenly. Thunder echoed across the land and rain poured down hard. Clara's body reacted before her mind did. She curled into herself, breath shallow. Ethan found her sitting on the floor of the guest room, shaking. "It's just a storm," he said gently. She nodded, but the fear didn't ease. "Can I sit with you?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He sat a short distance away, close enough to feel less alone, far enough to respect her space. They listened to the rain together. After a while, she spoke. "You don't treat me like I'm broken." He looked at her. "That's because you're not," she swallowed. "You're the first person who's made me feel that way." Something shifted between them then, not romance, not promises, just a deeper understanding. When the storm passed, Clara felt stronger, like she had faced something and lived through it. As weeks passed, the ranch no longer felt like a hiding place. It felt like a home in progress. But even as trust grew, Clara knew the past didn't disappear just because life felt safer. It waited quietly, like a shadow at the edge of the land. And though neither of them said it aloud, both understood that peace, once found, would eventually be tested. Still, for now, Clara chose to stay. And for now, Ethan chose to stand beside her. Together, they continued forward, unaware of how close they were to a moment that would demand more courage than either of them expected. The change came quietly at first, so small that Clara almost missed it. It was a feeling more than an event, like the air growing heavy before rain. She woke one morning with a tightness in her chest that would not leave. Nothing had gone wrong yet, but her body seemed to know something her mind did not. She went through her usual routine, helping with chores, feeding the animals, cleaning the house. Ethan noticed she was quieter than usual, her eyes often drifting toward the road. He did not ask right away. He had learned that sometimes silence spoke more clearly than words. Late that afternoon, while Ethan was repairing equipment near the shed, Clara was inside folding laundry. Through the open window, she heard the low sound of an engine. It was slow, unhurried, not like someone just passing by. Her hands froze mid-fold. The sound stopped. Her heart began to race. She moved to the window carefully and looked out. A truck stood near the edge of the property, farther than most visitors would stop, but close enough to make her stomach twist. She could not see the driver clearly, only the shape of a man sitting behind the wheel. Her breath grew shallow. Old fear rose fast and sharp, filling her chest. Ethan noticed the truck too. He straightened and wiped his hands on a cloth, his eyes narrowing slightly. Visitors were rare, and people who came usually drove straight to the house. The man stayed in the truck for a moment, then stepped out. He looked around slowly, like someone measuring a place. Clara stepped back from the window, panic spreading through her. Her legs felt weak. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, to run, to disappear like she had so many times before. Ethan walked toward the house calmly, though his senses were alert. He reached the porch just as the man called out. "Hello there," the stranger said. "Anyone home?" Ethan nodded. "That would be me. I was told this land belonged to the Miller family," the man said. "It does," Ethan replied. "I'm Ethan Miller." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Name S. Harris, I'm just asking around." Looking for someone who might have passed through this area. Clara's chest tightened painfully. She pressed her back against the wall, every muscle tense. She knew that tone, casual on the surface, searching underneath. Ethan's voice stayed even. "A lot of folks pass through." "What are you looking for?" "A young woman," Harris said. "Quiet type, might be working odd jobs, just want to make sure she's safe." The words sounded kind, but something about them felt wrong. Ethan felt it too. "Can't say I've seen anyone like that," Ethan said. Harris studied him closely. "You sure?" "I'm sure," Ethan replied. The man nodded slowly. "All right then, appreciate your time." He walked back to his truck, but instead of leaving right away, he paused, looking once more toward the house. Then he drove off, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. Ethan didn't move until the truck was gone. Then he turned and went inside. Clara was sitting on the floor near the kitchen, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked small, like she was trying to fold into nothing. "Clara," Ethan said softly. She looked up, eyes wide and full of fear. "He was looking for me," she whispered. Ethan knelt a short distance away. "I figured," he said gently. "You don't have to explain right now." Her hands shook. "I thought I was safe." "You are," he said firmly. He left. "But he knows I'm nearby," she said. "People like that don't just give up." Ethan took a slow breath. "Then we deal with it together." She stared at him. "You don't understand. If I stay, I could bring trouble to you, to your land." He met her gaze without hesitation. "Listen to me," he said. "You didn't ask for what happened to you, and you don't deserve to keep running." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't want to ruin your life." "You won't," he said. "Helping you isn't ruining anything, it's a choice I'm making." She shook her head. "You're risking too much." "Some things are worth the risk," he replied quietly. That night neither of them slept much. Ethan stayed alert, checking locks, making sure everything was secure. Clara lay awake, listening to every sound, her thoughts racing. In the early hours before dawn, she made a decision. When the sun rose, she packed her few belongings quietly. She folded Ethan's jacket carefully and placed it on the bed. Then she stood in the hallway, heart heavy, knowing this might be her only chance to leave without causing pain. She reached for the door. "Clara," she turned. Ethan stood at the end of the hall, eyes tired but clear. "I wasn't trying to leave without saying goodbye," she said quickly. "I know," he said. "You're trying to protect me," she nodded. "I can't stay, not after yesterday." He walked closer. "Running won't make the fear disappear. But staying might bring it to your door," she said. Ethan took a deep breath. "I grew up learning that land, family, and people you care about are all worth standing up for," he said. "If I let fear decide my actions, I wouldn't recognize myself." She looked at the floor. "You shouldn't have to choose because of me." "I already did," he said. "The moment I told you to come with me." Her eyes filled again. "Why?" "Because I saw someone who needed help," he said, "and because you matter." The words landed heavily between them. She sank into a chair, covering her face. "I'm so tired of being afraid," she said through tears. Ethan knelt in front of her, careful but close. "Then don't face it alone." Slowly, she lowered her hands and looked at him. "What if he comes back?" she asked. "Then we take the next step," Ethan said. "Together." There are ways to protect yourself without disappearing. She thought about all the times she had run, all the places she had slept without knowing if morning would come quietly. She thought about the ranch, the steady days, the kindness she had found here. "I don't know how to be brave," she whispered. "You already are," Ethan said. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing not to let fear control you." The room was quiet. Outside, the morning light filled the house with warmth. Finally, Clara nodded. "I'll stay," she said. "But I want to do this the right way. No more hiding." Ethan smiled, relief clear on his face. "That's all I ask." They spent the day talking through options, plans, small steps that made the future feel less overwhelming. Nothing dramatic, nothing rushed. Just choices made carefully. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky fade into deep blue, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not safety without fear, but safety with courage. And she knew, deep down, that the hardest part of her journey was not behind her yet. But for the first time, she was ready to face what came next, not by running, but by standing her ground. Beside her, Ethan watched the land he loved, knowing it was changing him again, teaching him that some promises are not spoken aloud. They are lived. And as the night settled around them, both understood that the next step would decide everything. The days after that decision felt different. Not easier, not free of worry, but clearer. Clara woke each morning knowing she had chosen to stay, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she wanted to face her life instead of running from it. That choice gave her a quiet strength she had never felt before. Ethan noticed the change right away. Clara still looked over her shoulder sometimes, still paused when unfamiliar sounds reached her ears, but there was something new in her eyes. She stood straighter. She spoke more openly. Fear no longer led every step she took. They began taking small, careful steps forward together. Ethan helped her make a simple plan, nothing official, nothing rushed. Just ideas. If someone came asking questions again, they would be ready. If Clara ever felt unsafe, she would say so. No secrets, no silent suffering. One afternoon, Ethan drove Clara into the nearest town. It was the first time she had gone somewhere public since arriving at the ranch. The buildings felt close together, the streets too loud. Her hands shook as she stepped out of the truck. Ethan noticed. "We can leave any time," he said. She nodded, taking a deep breath. "I want to try." They walked slowly. Ethan didn't rush her. They stopped for coffee, sat quietly, watched people pass by. Nothing bad happened. No one stared. No one followed. It felt small, but to Clara it was huge. That night she cried quietly in her room, not from fear but from relief. As weeks passed, Clara began to build a life that felt real. She started helping more with the ranch accounts, learning how supplies were ordered and animals were sold. She learned how to drive the old truck on empty roads. She even laughed more, real laughter that surprised her every time it came out. Ethan watched her grow, his heart both proud and careful. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give. What mattered was that she was healing. One evening, as they worked side by side repairing a fence, Clara spoke suddenly. "I used to think surviving was the same as living," she said. Ethan glanced at her. "What do you think now?" "I think surviving kept me alive," she said. "But living is this." She gestured at the open land, the work, the shared silence. Ethan smiled softly. "I'm glad you're here." She met his eyes. "Me too." The past didn't disappear. Sometimes letters arrived for Ethan that made Clara tense. Sometimes strangers drove by slowly, but nothing happened. And each quiet day made her stronger. One morning, Clara asked Ethan something she had been afraid to ask. "Do you think I could stay long-term?" she said carefully. "Not just as someone you're helping, but as someone who belongs here." Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked out over the land, then back at her. "I was hoping you'd ask," he said, her breath caught. "Really? This place has room," he said, "and so does my life." They didn't need big words. The truth was simple. Clara became part of the ranch, not as a guest, but as a partner in the work. The animals responded to her gentle care. The house felt warmer, fuller. Even the land seemed to breathe easier. One afternoon, a year after the night Ethan found her in the barn, they stood in that same place together. Sunlight streamed through the wooden slats, dust floating in the air. Clara looked around, remembering the fear, the exhaustion, the way she had tried to disappear. "I was hiding right there," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "I know. I thought my life was over," she said. "I didn't know it was just waiting to begin." He looked at her with quiet certainty. "Sometimes the hardest moments are doorways." She smiled, tears in her eyes, but her voice steady. "Thank you for opening the door." Ethan shook his head. "You walked through it." That evening, they sat on the porch as they had so many times before. The sky burned with color as the sun set behind the fields. Clara rested her hands on her knees, feeling the solid wood beneath her, the steady presence beside her. For the first time in her life, she was not hiding. She was home. And as the stars came out one by one, Clara understood something important. Her story was not defined by what she ran from, but by what she chose to stand for. Beside her, Ethan watched the night settle in, grateful that compassion had led him to the barn that evening long ago. Neither of them knew exactly what the future held, but they knew this much: they would face it together.